me just get a little introduction because I see some familiar faces and then some new faces. So I am Jenny Kohler and I'm the LiveDAYBREAK Master Gardener. And in this role, I am here as an educator, helping you to find success in your gardens. And I teach classes every month on a variety of different subjects. We taught a 4-week course in March about gardening in the community garden beds. Next month I'm teaching a fairy garden class. So a variety of things, but like I said, this is by far my favorite class to teach. And it's a big topic this season. And I think you're all here maybe being and feeling that awareness of maybe what we can do to find success in our yards, with our grass, with the current water conservation questions out there. So as a background, I have my degree from Utah State in landscape design with an emphasis in water conservation. I did my internship at the Jordan Valley Conservation Park, and I'm currently a graduate student through Utah State working with the Center for Water Efficient Landscaping, earning a degree in plant science. So this is my gig, and again, I kind of geek out over it, and it's exciting when I see that you are understanding it and it's making sense to you, and I hope that it translates in finding success. With that being said, we're playing a different game. We've been playing a different game for years, but this year I think we're just finally really aware of why we need to play this different game. And it's the water issue. And the water issue is not new to Utah. We are actually the second driest state in the nation, which is crazy to think, because that just means Nevada's ahead of us, but Arizona's, you know, behind us. Second driest state in the nation, and because we have this really unique climate, where we have hot, dry summers, cold, wet winters, where we rely on our water is not in the rain of the spring, it's in the snow of the winter. And so if we don't have snow in the winter, and if we don't keep cold temperatures in those early spring months, and we don't retain that snowpack, we can't make up that water deficit. So that's why this year is super significant. We had decent snowpack and we had some rain last August. And so lots of people visually are feeling, is this water, conversation really as dire as we're making it? But the difference is when you go multiple seasons without some of that moisture in those summer months, which again, last year we got some, the ground is so dry, it absorbs it immediately. And then there's no holding on to it because the plants use it up quickly, the ground absorbs it immediately, and there's just nothing left for our plants to use. So when we talk about our lawns, if you're familiar at all, how many is local to Utah? Okay, anyone from the Pacific Northwest? No? How about East Coast? Okay. Real different. It's a real different approach. I mean, I hadn't really understood until, I was more into the design side of it and talking to people that irrigation wasn't even a part of conversations for a lot of you that have lived out of state. You wouldn't have even known. And that is a big problem within the community because we at Daybreak Community, we have a lot of residents that are not native to Utah. And so they're coming in and they're trying to figure out how to landscape, how to figure out this Utah thing, how to figure out these funky temperatures. And so putting irrigation as part of that formula can make it even overwhelming. And so hopefully I can help you change some of that thought process. And I'll stay after and answer as many questions as I can for you and help you try to get, if I don't know the answers, I usually can get you on the right track. And so I'm going to focus a lot on water, but I'm going to start at some of the basics. So some of the key things that we have to start doing in any type of garden situation is good soil. Good soil is not something that we have by nature here. In Utah, we have more of an alkaline soil, which means it has a higher salt content, which also means that it can compete sometimes for nutrition. We also, here in Daybreak, we grow the best rocky clay soil of anywhere in the valley, and so it has its challenges because it's really hard to dig into, it's really hard to try to till up and to move. And then a lot of you had no control over when your landscape got put in. It was put in by your builder. who knows what they did, right? Truly, if wishes were fishes, you'd all have 6 inches of really good topsoil to establish your lawns properly. I will lay a bet that none of us have ever had that. And I'm a resident. I've lived here 15 years and raised my family here. So I can speak to all the daybreakness that there is there. So knowing that those are your challenges and knowing that you probably inherently didn't get us the right start. And then if you didn't understand watering practices and some of the challenges there, then you're also running up against it. So if you lived here multiple seasons and your grass is struggling, part of that may be that in the initial establishment phase, something was missed. And that's really key because you can't really go back. The hardest caveat this year is it's going to be really, really hard to get the grass going when we've got the limitations. Now, technically, we don't have any set limitations. If you talk to people up north, they do have limitations. They're asked in some of the water districts to not even install new turf. They've actually been told they can, in some districts, asked not to establish any new turf. We do not have currently any water restrictions. It is a matter of time. I personally feel like, again, we're late to that conversation. And I feel like in this end of the valley, you should be penalized financially for the water you use. If that's the only way we can get you to start thinking about this. But they want to go about it in a more positive way, and they want to entice you to make those changes. So you've got existing turf. You're not trying to establish new turf. What can you do? First step is aeration. Aeration needs to happen really on an annual basis. Because of that clay soil, oxygen, you know, you go back to your 3rd grade biology class, it's oxygen, water, sunshine. It's all part of that growing, that photosynthesis cycle. So we've got to allow oxygen to get into those rooting systems of our lawn. Aeration, and it can be done at any time. It just cannot be done if the soil or the ground is soggy at all, because you don't want any compaction issues. So good aeration, plug aeration, leave your aeration plugs on the lawn. Don't rake them up. I know they're annoying. The kids love them. If you do them early spring, then it's usually a little bit better. And then you top dress that lawn bed with a good organic material. You can get it by the truckload. Trans-Jordan landfill, I will here to dispel any myths about the compost at the Trans-Jordan landfill. I've used it for 20 years. I've never had a problem. They control what goes into the landfill compost as well as the heat cycle. It's one of the best in the county. I've heard down in Utah County, one of the landfills, they've had some problems, but again, I've used it for years in a lot of applications and I never have a problem. You can bring it in by the bag. So if you just have an area that you're just struggling with and you don't need a full truckload, you can bring it in by the bags. But that aeration, if you can do the aeration, and it's not super expensive. I think my yard's like 35, 40 bucks to get those air pockets open. Then you do the top dressing. Now that we're warming up a little bit, we have to be a little mindful. If we were to do this maybe 2 months ago, you could be a little bit more heavy-handed because the grass blades would be coming up. So you want to go ahead and rake that good organic material into those aeration holes. Like you rake it with the, the tine side down, and then you turn that hard rake over and you push it and really work it into those aeration holes, getting good organic material into the rooting system. This is really key in thin areas or any places that may have had compaction issues. So step 1, aeration, adding organic material. And you could do that annually. Wouldn't be any harm in doing that annually. But what you don't want to do is you don't want to suffocate any grass blades, especially as they're greening up. 2, let's talk a little bit about the science of a cool season grass. So I've heard and I've gotten a lot of emails about my grass is still dead. So understanding cool season grasses. Your grass isn't dead, it's dormant. So all plants have a life cycle, right? Trees flower, bloom, set their leaves, go through the summer, set fruit in the fall, right? Grass is the same thing. For the most of us, we all have Kentucky bluegrass. It is a cool season grass. So it has a natural life cycle. But like all good gardeners, we want to manipulate it to our benefit, to help us feel better, right? Because we feel this pressure to have this green lawn and we want it to green up first. So I hope that all of you will be my ambassadors this summer of owning that we may not have the greenest grass. Doesn't mean we don't have healthy grass. Doesn't mean we don't have a lawn that is not full of weeds. It just means it's not so green. We're going to embrace a little bit more of the brown. We do that by not trying to force it out of its dormancy at the wrong times. So usually we're out there, right? We got those good days. We haven't really had super warm days this last month. But we get out in April, we got that one Saturday, we're turning our backflows on, we're spreading the nitrogen. Okay, so I'm going to skip ahead to nutrition a little bit here. Nitrogen is only good for green. It's only good for growth. So if we start throwing down nitrogen right now, or in that early spring, we are sacrificing root development for green. There's trade-offs, right? So yeah, you can have green. And again, you can absolutely have a green lawn all summer long. But for me, I would sure rather be with my family on the weekends having fun than out there doing my yard work. And grass is the one part of our garden that requires a weekly maintenance. So I'm trying to move away from anything that requires that weekly time frame. So if we can leave it, not cut it, not give it nutrition in the early spring and allow nature to take its course, we're doing so much good for the actual rooting systems of the grass. Okay, so nutrition is still key. Nutrition is still key. Just like I said, having the phosphorus or having the organic material moved into the rooting system. When a grass is being established, usually you put on more phosphorus because it helps establish roots. But this year, and honestly, I have followed this cycle, gosh, probably for the last 8 years. And I'll tell you my trick. This is one of the things you'll come away with this class from attending this class and not my other classes, is I'll tell you the trick on the nutrition in just a minute. But skip this spring one. And then I'm going to encourage you to skip the July one. With the exception is if you have a really serious weed problem, and I prefer the IFA system. I don't have any licensing to it or anything, but I do prefer the IFA system only because its system and the time frame it's established does hit when the weed suppression or the weed herbicides that are in it hit at the right time frame when we're going to see them. So we're having big conversations this year about flipping your strip, pulling out grass where it's not necessary. And that is, to be honest, in the world of water managers and like the conservation garden, that has been a part of that conversation for years now, has encouraged it. I personally have been a part of multiple meetings with the developers of Daybreak about establishing that. And I'd go back and talk to my friends and they'd be like, it's just a matter of time. Well, time has come. In now all new South Jordan developments, the city has signed off. There's no grass and park strips in any new South Jordan developments. It's awesome. And you may have heard through the years, oh, the HOA will not allow us to flip your strips. Absolutely incorrect. You can flip your strips. But, you know, of course there's going to be some rules. 80% vegetation at maturity, and it has to be drip irrigated, of course, because that's ideal for any plant material. Drip irrigation is key. And then it needs to have a winter interest. So it needs to have something that's evergreen that you would see in those winter months. South Jordan City has its own rebate system, watersmartsojo.com. Within that, they have drip irrigation conversion kits and a $300 plant rebate through South Jordan City. That $300 plant rebate does not have to be just used for flipping your strip. You want to add perennials, some water-wise perennials, reestablish a flower bed, you can use that for $300. Take advantage of that rebate. They also do have rocks, and then I just noticed the other day that if you pull out, I think it's about 200 square feet of sod and replace it with a hardscape, so a paver, a patio, they will give you a $500 rebate. And you can have all of those rebates. Those are all available to you. So take it. They do have a rock one where they will deliver rocks to you. But again, if you're using it in your park strip, you still have to be mindful in the design plan that you're going to have 80% vegetation at maturity. And I was just having this conversation with some of the team at the LiveDAYBREAK offices. Well, why wouldn't we just pull off the turf and just put rocks? Why would we put vegetation? Well, one, we still need irrigation systems for trees, right? Trees not only are shade, they not only provide for, you know, our animal friends, they create carbon exchange, and they also are, what's the word? You know, they're beautiful, right? They're curb appeal, right? Like we don't want to lose out on that curb appeal, especially you see East Lake where we're in right now. I've lived here 15 years. I mean, our trees are really beautiful right now because they're starting to be established. We don't want to lose out on that. And if we do ever come to water restrictions, where it will come to will be our turf. You will have to turn off your lawns. So again, maybe it's time to rethink the way your yard is laid out. And again, I know, and I hope there's no landscapers out there, but sometimes they're just dumb. They make dumb decisions. And on the developer side of things, I'm like, why would you float a tree in a lawn? That's like bad landscape tree practice as far as watering. Trees, shrubs should all be within a planting bed, and they should all be drip irrigated, in my opinion. But because then if we had these water restrictions, or if we ever had to dial back, I'd let the lawn go, but I'm not about to lose my 15-year-old established perennial beds, right? So that's where we're going to see it. That's where we can make the difference. And I know it's frustrating. And I know in reality, we as homeowners are a really small part of the problem. But I'm hoping that as a homeowner, you start to make these changes, you start to see the benefit of it. Then you become engaged citizens, you become an engaged worker, you walk into your office and you're like, why, Steve, are we having the sprinklers running every day? I come here every day and your sprinklers are running. Let's change that. Or why do we have lawn in the middle of a shopping complex? Right? Like, we shouldn't be putting lawn. Lawn, again, people are like, well, lawn's easy. Well, no, it requires a weekly maintenance. Established flower beds requires once, twice a year, if you've done it right and you're watering appropriately. So helping be a part of that good water conversation is really, really key. And then I do think as you establish your yards, you're going to have someone who's going to come up to you and say, hey, what are you doing? You're doing something right. Tell me your tricks. And then you can explain to them, hey, well, I've actually dialed this back and this is making a difference. Okay, aeration. What's my next step? What do I skip?
Lower height.
Okay. Really, really important. And this is what you're going to hear from all the water managers this year. Our maintenance practices. Again, I would rather be playing on the weekends than working on my yard, right? So one, rethink some of those spaces. If you have lawn in a space less than 8 feet, think about pulling it out, thinking about redoing something, because again, that's a weekly maintenance. So changing our mower height is super, super key. And I'm going to throw you men under the bus. It is not us women who are out there measuring. It is you. You want it to be a certain way. If you are a golf course manager, I'm going to let you do whatever you want because I realize you're making money. But we've got to rethink that. It needs to be thick and lush and green, and that reflection of what we have above ground is reflection of the rooting system. So does anyone have thin patches of lawn? You're struggling with thin patches of lawn, okay? So where it's thin, that's reflective of the rooting system below. So you've got root, that means your roots are all on that upper level. They're not seeking out water, and mostly that comes from maintenance and watering practices that we see thin grass. It can be because you have grass in an area and suddenly you have a tree or a shrub now competing for nutrients or sunlight. So rethinking those areas is super important. So when we mow, we want to keep our mowers on the highest setting. The absolute highest setting. If you've gone out of town and your grass has gotten quite tall and you're like, if I leave it on the highest setting, it's going to be like a jungle out there. Then what you do is you never want to take off more than 1/3 of the time. And I teach this in my pruning class. Because if you take off more than 1/3 of the time, you're putting the plant into stress. And grass is the same as any other plant. A tree, if I was to take off, like come and thin out these trees and take off more than 1/3 of that tree, the tree's response will be to heal those cuts. When we mow, it's just like we pruned. So if we keep mowing and we're taking off a big chunk at a time, we're letting it go so long, and then we're trying to bring it back down, that means the energy of that plant is taking time to heal those top cuts and not focusing on the rooting system. So by leaving it high, we are creating that reflective development below ground. And again, we're coming out of the winter season. So I mowed mine last week, partially because I had some leaf debris in my lawn, and I have puppies, and so I had these weird high spots, and then I left some clippings and stuff that I'd pulled off shrubs, and so I have these weird high spots. It's not super even right now. I'm not going to win Yard of the Month. I hope the HOA changes that this year, and it's like, you tried really, really hard, and maybe you're making a difference awards, right? But that mower height is going to be key. To flip to a mulch setting. Almost any of the new mowers that you've purchased in the last 10 years has a plug. If you don't know where it is and you don't have it, you can probably order it. It truly just goes in that trap door where you would hook up your bag to it and you put the plug in. A true mulch mower doesn't just leave grass clippings on a lawn. It actually cuts it up fine enough that you're not going to see a difference. Now granted, if you left your lawn really, really high and you're trying to take it down, you might see some. Take the rake. I mean, I just go out there sometimes with the puppies and I kick it in. And why we leave those grass clippings is that high level, that top part of the blade of the grass, that is what's full of nutrition. That's the greenest. So by cutting off just that top level, we are allowing that good nutrition to organically break down into our lawn, getting nutrition into our rain beds. It's really hard to fertilize grass efficiently, you know, and throwing a chemical down is maybe not the route we want to go. So mower height. Also, if you're not flipping your strip, please, please, please pull the grass away from your trees. It's one of the things within our design guidelines is actually supposed to be required, but it has not been enforced. I don't know that it will be, but it is imperative we move as much away from our trees. You can see these more established trees. This is the drip line is where the canopy of trees extends out. And technically, you should not have any grass underneath that canopy line. It's a true story. About 4 years ago, we've always had a circle in our park strip trees, but our trees are getting bigger and that circle is getting a little thin. So when my husband or I would mow, it just wasn't efficient. It wasn't looking nice. And so one day I just said, hey, let's go straight on. Let's create a rectangular bed and let's widen it and give that tree a little bit more space from the grass. So my husband's out there working. And he finishes the one tree and he comes in and he's like, you're not going to believe it. And I'll just tell you honestly, my park strip has just been crap for years. I fight weeds with it. I've tried different chemical interventions and I usually for the most part am fairly organic. We've changed sprinkler heads. We've gone to the different supply stores to get, you know, sprinkler heads that are meant for park strips. It just hasn't been great. He comes in and he's just laughing. He's like, I just uncovered 2 sprinkler heads. We'd lived in that home for 11, 12 years. 2 of our sprinkler heads that was supposed to be watering our park strip they had just laid the turf over. But because we had no part of the installation process, we had no idea there would be sprinkler heads. I wouldn't know to count off or to know where it was. And again, because we have these yards, I have an alleyway approach. So my park strip feeds the neighbors. So their sprinklers, we actually uncovered 1 on their line and 1 on our line. Goes to do the other tree, a 3rd head covered. So a lot of the times when we're seeing struggles within our yard and we go run this, you know, our irrigation system, we're like, it's getting water. So I encourage you, especially in drip irrigation, is to pull up those lines. They should be brought up above your mulch and you should be able to visually see water coming out of it, because I can guarantee you 90% of the plant problems is watering. Either overwatering or you've got a blocked, especially in planting beds, a blocked drip irrigation head. And it's just not visible and easy to see. Another maintenance practice is water in the early morning hours. Start 5 or 6 o'clock. I like to water in the mornings. Late at night is fine, but we do get some wind out here late at night. And so I've gone for walks like, you know, in the summertime when it's not so hot and you can see the wind blowing the sprinkler heads. 2 in the mornings, usually someone goes outside at some point in the mornings. And so you can see if there's a problem. You can see if there was a leak. But if it goes on at night and then by the morning it's dried up or you haven't accessed it, you may be missing something. So watering in those early morning hours is key. If you have a slope, you may have to change the way you irrigate. There's a process called cycle irrigation, and that is where you would run, and this is for your sprinklers, your overhead sprinkler heads that are watering lawn areas, not drip irrigation. It's where you would cycle on your sprinklers for maybe 10 minutes at a time, and then you go through all your cycles for 10 minutes. If your water is just overflowing, or you're getting standing water, or you're getting runoff water by running it the whole time frame, and I'm going to talk water in just a minute, and I'll back into that concept there. So running it in those early morning hours is key. 2, it allows before evapotranspiration can happen. It also allows for fungus. And because there's warmth in the morning versus at nighttime, that warmth actually triggers good growing cycles within our plants. So I really recommend always watering in those early morning hours. Okay, water. I'm going to step out of the limelight. This has been the watering guide that's established by the Jordan Valley Water District. Whenever I've been asked to consult on somebody's yard, one of the first steps I ever take is go look at their irrigation box. 9 times out of 10, they're watering a little bit every day, because that feels right. It feels, I'm giving it water every day. It's really hard for the human eye to judge how much water a plant is taking in and a plant's needs. You're going to see a lot more education going on about hydro zones and creating zones for your plants that make sense. But again, for the most of us who didn't get to make all the choices on our plants and our planting beds, we're going to go with this guide. So in this guide, it's saying by Mother's Day weekend, we are only watering once every 5 days. Then by Father's Day weekend, we are watering every 3 days. So that's a little hard when you have an old irrigation timer system, because there's 7 days in a week and every 3 days doesn't work, right? So after Father's Day through Labor Day, you're watering 3 times a week. And then after Labor Day, you're back to every 5 days. We're going to see a lot more rebates again this year on smart timers. And I'm really excited because part of one of my summer projects through the Botanical Center up in Canesville is going to be on smart timer systems. And I'm really excited to see some of the advancements we're seeing on that. This year, it's going to be a little bit different. And so I want you just to be your own smart irrigation timer. I want you to maybe turn off your timer system and really pay attention through this next month. This will be key if we cannot walk into the water season in a deficit, because we're all in a rush. We start to get those 70-degree days. You're all feeling warm because we're Utahns, and so 70 really feels amazing to us. Our grass doesn't need it. It's just starting to come out of dormancy. We would have to really go to the crazy, which is possible, and go right to some 80-degree days to really start to see some plant stress. So if your grass is still not looking great, think of it as dormancy cycle. We have no reason to put any water down with the amount of water we received in this last week. And if I looked at the temperatures today, overnight lows aren't breaking the 40s for the next 10 days. So you can't even put tomatoes into your flower beds uncovered until you consistently have overnight lows being in the upper 50s. So think about that as you're putting in your plants this year. So what I want you to think about is you water deeply but infrequently. So the timer, if you were to go back and you set your timer, if you have a fixed sprinkler head, it runs for 25 minutes. If you have a rotator head, it runs for 45 minutes. That time never changes. Okay. Anticipating a water season. We can train our grass. There is so many people who truly only put down water every 10 days and still have green grass. But it's going to take time. So if you have grass that's struggling, it's a little hard this year to rehab it. But use good water practices now and train it. Because again, that root development is reflective of that top growth. So if you want your grass to be thick and healthy, you want to train it to search out that water. If we keep feeding it every day just a little bit, then all the roots will just stay on that top section and it will not go down. That's the same with our shrubs and our trees, though. If we just feed it a little bit every day because it feels right, then we're not creating good rooting systems, and then we're not going to have plants that are going to be able to make it through, you know, bigger drought conditions or water restrictions. And so being mindful right now. When I teach the design class in the early winter months, I talk about plants and pruning and plants in the right place. There are so many great plants out there. So if you have a really water-thirsty plant, maybe it's time to rethink that this season. And then if you have a plant that's requiring just a ton of maintenance, maybe it's time to rethink that. I always say, you know, if you're out there working that much to prune something to keep it in the right place, in the right shape, and in a ball, you got the wrong plant. Marie Kondo it, thank it's for its time in your life, and let it go, because we don't have time for that or energy for that. And for all of us, again, having this conversation, you'll see this is the other trick, the different things. And I checked Utah State's extension page today. I also watched a video from Chan Sher Sod, making sure that whatever current conversations that I'm speaking to it. Mulching our planter beds is really, really key. And in Daybreak, that's part of our design commitment, is that we will keep a mulch layer on our planting beds, because that keeps our water, when we drip irrigate, it keeps our water within our rooting systems. And that's why we're going to have successful shrubs and trees to get through these hot months. And then really maybe think about it. I'm not against using annuals. Annuals work really great in pots for those big splashes of color, but there are so many great perennials out there that are water-wise. A couple resources for you. Jordan Valley Conservation Park. It's down there between 78 South and 90th South and 78 South and 1300 West. It is a free botanical garden, open year-round. It will show you design concepts, especially if you're looking to do any rehab, as well as every plant within the conservation garden is a water-wise plant, and you're going to be blown away. Open year-round, so you can go now and see what's coming out in the spring. You can go in the summer and see it in its full glory, and then in the fall to see fall color, to see suggestions. In order to qualify for that plant rebate through South Jordan, you have to choose a plant within their garden guide, but there's a plethora to choose from. Water Smart Sojo is where you can get your rebates. Also, the city will come out and do a water audit. If the sprinkler systems and what you're doing doesn't feel like you're working, call them now, set up the appointment, have them come out and water audit your sprinkler system. They'll come out and water audit your whole house. Just to understand, if you've got a toilet, we have fixed our toilets and tried to do these fixes, and I felt like our water, because I knew I wasn't watering in the yard, and then this year we're finally getting around to some bathroom renovations, and I switched out one toilet in the basement that we don't use. My water bill dramatically, I feel terrible because I tried to be water conscious. I had no idea that one toilet, it probably had a problem. It just wasn't visible, right? Get a water audit. Have them come out. Have these irrigation guys come out and say, you know what, you need to tweak this head. Here's a suggestion for this head. This will water more efficiently. So you can understand it and be a part of that change. Nutrition. So organic material is always so great, whatever you do. I personally top dress all my planter beds with that organic material from the landfill. I do that instead of bark. I personally don't like bark. I think it gets into your mower and messes up your blades. The kids kick it and it's messy. So I go get a yard of the compost from the Trans-Jordan landfill after I've done any of my plantings, after I've done my spring cleanup, and I will come in and I will put it in within all my shrubs and trees, and then I turn on my irrigation system and I water it in, and then I leave it for the entire summer. I have a lot of flower beds. I have a smaller yard, but I have a lot of flower beds. I weed 1 or 2 days the entire summer. Part of it is healthy plants will outcompete weeds. And if you're using drip irrigation appropriately, you're only watering what it needs, and so then it's not watering weeds. If you try to take any of those weed classes like Conservation Park offers, that is exactly what they'll tell you. They're not going to tell you a chemical intervention. They're going to tell you this. If you have a dandelion problem right now, part of that is thin grass. Part of that is we live in this beautiful neighborhood where our yards are all connected, and sometimes you have people with different watering practices and different maintenance practices. But think about dandelions. They are actually a perennial. No, they're a biennial, and so they actually set their rosettes in the ground the season before. So if you try to do like a preen or something like that, that is for an annual weed. So you need something like a broadleaf herbicide or a really good knife. It's my personal choice. There's a horticulture knife called a Hori knife, H-O-R-I. There's some great ones on Amazon. It's got a really, really sharp blade. It is so key that we try to get those out. Another concern about having no grass or trying to put, like flipping the strip and putting just rocks in, if we have all these open spaces that isn't getting irrigated, there's actually quite a few weeds that's their ideal growing conditions. You can see that in our community spaces where we have the native landscape. Cheatgrass is one of them. It will take seed in those spaces. So we don't want to be pulling out all of our plants, and we don't want to be stopping water completely. We just want to get to the point where we can compete, look good, and doing our part in the water conversation.